to our guest, who is the president of Teamsters Local 237, Greg Floyd. That union representing 24,000 employees in New York City and on Long Island, including school safety agents, which is what we're talking about tonight. So thank you so much for joining us, Greg.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you.
Glad to be here with you.
Great. Let's get right to it. I wanted to ask you, how has the job of a school safety agent changed during the pandemic and over the course of the last year? Obviously, we've seen less students inside of the schools, but just as recently as last week, we saw 2 different instances where safety agents had to confiscate weapons that were disguised as everyday items in schools in Brooklyn and in Queens. And breaking tonight, you have some exclusive details to share with us about another incident that happened inside of another school today.
Yes. Just before we got on air, I was notified that a 9-inch kitchen knife was found at IS 145 in Queens, and that was found by one of the deans of the school, and there was no student that was attached to that weapon, meaning that they didn't say a student brought it in, but obviously a student brought the weapon into the classroom. Now, IS school, intermediate school, is usually 6th, 7th, 8th, and possibly a 9th grade student. So we're talking about a young population of children bringing weapons into schools.
Yeah. So how has that impacted how school safety agents are doing their jobs of protecting students inside of those classrooms?
Well, it's difficult because you don't have metal detectors in those schools, that's one. And then you have the pressure of all of the activists touting a prison, the school to prison pipeline, and the school safety agents are apprehensive. Although they've collected a lot of knives over the last few weeks of schools opening, very few, not any that I know of, children have been arrested for this, including stun guns. They just handle it administratively. Now, that's good for the child, but you are not deterring children from bringing weapons into schools. All you're doing is telling the other children, you better bring weapons into schools also, because you have to protect yourselves because nothing's being done. Now, you don't have to lock children up, but you have to have some sort of discipline, whether they come back to school with a parent and that parent and child are made to sit in front of the principal and the deans to explain this cannot happen. This sort of behavior is not acceptable. But you can't just give a slap on the wrist. You have to have some sort of discipline.
You talked a little bit about the political discourse, and I know back in February there was talk about the upcoming city budget, including $20 million to hire 475 new school safety agents. That received a lot of reactions, some talk even of canceling that class of agents altogether. Right now, what is the status of that, as far as you know?
I don't know. I found out about the hiring of that class during that hearing, but I know this much. It takes time to hire school safety agents. You can't just say, okay, we need them now, let's go hire them. You have to screen them, you have to train them, you have to make sure they're investigated. So it's not a 1, 2, 3 process. The same as we had a rash and we have a rash of violence in the subways. New York City does not have police officers to flood the subways to protect the subway riders. Why? Because during this pandemic, during the whole George Floyd protests, the city council decided that they were not going to hire police officers, and they pushed that class back. Now you need them. You can't just dial a police officer and say, we want you to work for us now. That takes time to hire, train. So that process can be anywhere from 7 months to a year to hire new police officers.
So hoping to get some clarity, I imagine, on your end sooner rather than later. Real quick, lastly, I just want to get to a bill that is proposed in the city council right now that would get all school safety agents out of schools by June of next year, if passed. It has not been passed. What's your reaction to that? How do you think that would impact how schools operate and keep their students safe?
I don't think there's a bill to get school safety agents out of the schools. I think the bill was to put the school safety agents, move them from the police department to the Department of Education. I think that's the bill. And I that would impact the level of service, because the police department knows how to hire, screen, investigate, and train. The Department of Education did a poor job. They don't have a process of screening, investigating school safety agents or anybody else for that instance. They did a poor job of discipline.
All right. Greg Floyd, president of Teamsters Local 237, thank you so much for your time tonight and for sharing your perspective on those important issues and bringing us that breaking update.
Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely.